This video is sponsored by my faithful Patreon supporters. If you'd like to become a Patreon supporter today, click on the link in the description. Table talk!
Oh God.
Table talk! Ladies and gentlemen, Knights of the Round Table, how you doing? Name's Arthur, not really. So as you guys have noticed by my lack of uploading, I've been kind of going through what we call a dry spell, where pretty much what I do is I completely ignore all responsibilities and not download anything new, and I just pretty much play on my own time. Today, what I would like to do a little rant about, as you can see I have this nice floral sort of looking psychedelic background. Well, this background here you might have seen on another channel known as Lauren Ashley. If you want to know more about her, a link will be in the description. She does a lot of vlogging and unboxing and makeup videos, that sort of stuff. So if you want to see some of that, click a link in the description. It'll take you straight to her channel. If you want to subscribe, go ahead, please do it. What I would like to do today is, this is a sort of news sort of show where I go in depth over things. And what I'd like to talk about is horror games, the sort of like horror genre of video games. Because as you can obviously tell, there has been this sort of dry spell. There are no good sort of horror games coming out lately. You guys can argue with me that Resident Evil 2 is, relatively new, and I can say, hey, fuck you, that's the wrong answer, because the right answer is that that game came out, in like 19 something? It's a remake in 3D, instead of having that sort of fixed camera angle that made the Resident Evil games scary. Of course, you could also argue with me that Resident Evil 7 was a really good game, but also that game came out, 2 years ago? In the past year, there has been nothing good. So all we've been doing as content creators, especially like horror genre sort of content creators, we have to go on to Itch.io and Game Jolt, and because Desura is no longer a thing, we have to also go to Steam, where there is just a pile of garbage, where people are trying to make you pay ludicrous amounts for their poorly made and developed games. And as you've seen in the past, I've done videos where I make fun of these developers. I make my own games on camera to show how fucking easy it is. And yet these people still think they can go into RPG Maker and shit out a game in 15 minutes and say, hey, yeah, I deserve $5 for this from everyone who wants to play this. No. Anytime a developer tries to release their game, every single time I try and tell them that they need to release their games for free first. That way they get some sort of a backing. People can see their quality of work, and so then they want to see more from you. And they might even support you on, let's say, websites like Patreon and things like that. They might even help support you whenever you finally release a game on Steam that's actually worthwhile. All I see nowadays on Itch.io are these poorly made shit jump scare poofer games where the enemy will come at you out of fucking nowhere, scare you for a sec, and then just disappear out of nowhere. There's no effect, there's no sound effects, there's nothing. It's just non-existent. So what I'd like to compare this to is sort of like the horror movie sort of genre, because like back in the day, you had Nightmare on Elm Street, you had Friday the 13th. Those two were the big kings of the time, the slasher sort of genre. They also had personality as well. Over the course of those sort of years, whenever those movies were still being made, you also kind of had like Halloween and stuff sort of on the side, and then there was just sort of a dry spell. The horror in the movie sort of business no longer sort of existed until Saw became a thing. And then whenever Saw first released, it was a indie movie with, I think, maybe like a few $1,000 budget, and then that got millions of dollars. And then so they released 2 more movies, and whenever those 2 released, Paranormal Activity came out. And then Paranormal Activity became the big thing, and Saw was forgotten. People didn't care anymore for that sort of torture porn sort of movie. They wanted to see more paranormal stuff that was like found footage. And then found footage movies became a big thing. Sort of like how Blair Witch Project became such a big thing was because people thought it was real. And the same thing with Paranormal Activity. At the very beginning of those movies, they all say that yes, this was all real or whatever. And apparently it was based off of true events, but of course it was more shown on the big screen with more effects and more bullshit. And that's the sort of thing that's happening with the horror game genre. Back in the day, back in 2010, 2011, the big thing at the time was Amnesia: The Dark Descent. Whenever that game came out, it was the biggest sort of game on the market. It didn't matter if it was like an action game or a racing game or anything like that. Amnesia: The Dark Descent was by far one of the best-selling indie titles in existence. And then since then, it's kind of gone downhill. Because after that, especially for YouTube, Amnesia was a big thing. And then you had Slender: The Eight Pages. That was another huge success, which also came out with its own big budget game soon after on Steam. And then you had Five Nights at Freddy's craze, which was a gigantic monster truck of a behemoth coming at everybody. And if you didn't conform to these sort of games, you weren't going to grow on your channel whatsoever. So if you wanted to play all these different sort of off games that were free from Itch.io, GameJolt, and Desura at the time, then you were able to grow rather quickly still, but still not enough as like the people who decided to play Amnesia and Slender and Five Nights at Freddy's. Soon after, I believe Slender came out, I think in 2013 is whenever Outlast was released. And Outlast is by far, in my opinion, one of the best horror games in existence. And after playing through Outlast 2, I lost all faith in my decision to saying, hey, the Outlast series is the best. Because Outlast 1 was fantastic, Whistleblower DLC was great, and then Outlast 2 was another one of those sort of things that it tried too hard to be scary. Also, I think it was mainly because Outlast 1 was more about psychological and sort of spirits and that sort of thing. Whereas the Outlast 2 was more religious. And as a lot of you know, I'm not a very religious person. I played Dante's Inferno, and I let the person who killed Jesus Christ live. So I absolved him and let him go to heaven because I'm a dick. That's what I do. I like to fuck around. So, after this Outlast sort of craze, it became this huge popular thing, had its DLC, it was over and done with, people were still talking about it and still wanting more. And then that's whenever Five Nights at Freddy's hit the market in 2014, 2015, and then after that is whenever the horror genre sort of stagnated, because then everything you saw was a Five Nights at Freddy's clone. We saw the same thing with Slender though. Every single horror sort of tag on GameJolt and Itch.io had that sort of Slender Man sort of esque gameplay, whereas now it's the Five Nights at Freddy's sort of gameplay. Throughout all these years, people are still making Five Nights at Freddy's clones, and also Five Nights at Freddy's has become this huge thing, especially with marketing and toys and shirts and hats and accessories and all that sort of stuff. Good thing to Scott Cawthon for all of his success, but it still doesn't warrant the fact that Five Nights at Freddy's aren't good games. See, the thing is that makes something scary is a lot more than just a jump scare, because after a while, whenever you get desensitized to jump scares and being frightened in general, normal consensus is the fact that whenever you're facing these jump scares multiple times over and over, because throughout Five Nights at Freddy's, you will die multiple times. And so you see these same jump scares over and over and over and over, maybe 50, 60 times before you're able to actually complete one of the games. Over time, it no longer becomes a horror game, it becomes more of like a challenging puzzle where you have to try and figure out why they're moving the way they do and where they're going to come from and how you can stop them. Instead, it just becomes this gigantic mess. The same thing goes for Five Nights at Freddy's 2, which was shortly released after Five Nights at Freddy's 1, the original. And it had the same sort of gameplay, except for in this game, they added a music box you had to wind up or else you got instant killed. Because that's fair. That's fun, right? You want to play a horror game so you can rage and cry yourself to sleep at night, trying to figure out how to beat the freaking game. And of course, then there was Five Nights at Freddy's 3, Five Nights at Freddy's 4, Five Nights at Freddy's Sister Location, Five Nights at Freddy's Pizzeria Simulator, and now Five Nights at Freddy's VR. As you can tell, it's becoming more and more saturated with a bunch of bullshit, because all the games are essentially the same, and they're trying to tell you this compelling story over the course of 7 games. Honestly, I'm tired of it. And then lo and behold, in 2017, a little indie gem came out called Baldi's Basics in Education and Learning. It curved the sort of horror genre on its head. it turned it completely around 180, and it used the sort of edutainment sort of graphics back from the days like Freddy Fish and Putt Putt and that sort of stuff, if you ever played those. And it used that edutainment sort of gimmick and then used it as a horror plot. And so what they did is they made it to where the teacher, if you got the answers wrong, would try and kill you. And whenever you would like run in the halls, the principal would put you in detention, putting you into this state of emergency because you're stuck in this small room for 15 seconds. And the more you got caught, the longer the time was. And the more notebooks you received, the faster the teacher was to be able to kill you. And then eventually it just came down to where it had the same problem as Five Nights at Freddy's. You were going to die a lot because it's a challenging game. It's a puzzle sort of game where you have to try and figure out the right course to do things. And also things are also randomly generated, so things are different every single time you play, which is the unfortunate thing. I have beat the game. It took me about an hour and a half, but I finally beat it on footage and I uploaded the one video of it. The thing I'm starting to hate the most about doing YouTube as a horror sort of channel is the fact that if I don't conform to the things that are popular, even though they suck ass, I get punished for it. And it doesn't make sense because the horror genre right now is one of the worst gaming genres out there because the games suck. There is nothing that has come out that has been evolutionary, decent, or even remotely entertaining or scary. And then you have all these sort of projects on the side that have demos and stuff like that that never get released, which are fantastic horror games. And then you never see them because they never see the light of day because people only want these shit sort of games like Five Nights at Freddy's and Baldi's Basics, which get all the support even though they're garbage. And then you have these good horror games that are trying to get support on Kickstarter and Patreon and all that sort of stuff, and they get pushed to the side because they're not meme worthy or whatever the fuck. It doesn't matter. Okay, I gotta admit, Resident Evil 7 was a good game, but it came out, like I said, quite a while ago. Soma was a fantastic game. It's made by the same people as Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which Amnesia: The Dark Descent was also a fantastic horror game. And so in the past 7-8 years, the only good horror games that have come out have been like 4. But with me bringing up these different games, you notice that it's just like the film industry. The sort of horror that people are looking for changed over time. First, you had Amnesia: The Dark Descent, which was a big scary mansion with a bunch of monsters inside of it that you had to run from. Then after Amnesia: The Dark Descent, there was the Slender games, where it was a big open field with a bunch of trees where you had to collect things while the monster was chasing you. And it was a big difference. And then shortly after that was Outlast. It returned to the Amnesia sort of formula where you were in this big abandoned sort of mental institution, but it also had ghosts on the side that were trying to kill you, and big monsters and big crazy people, naked people to get demonetized because of some of those videos. And then shortly after that, you had the craze of Five Nights at Freddy's, which was revolutionary. I gotta admit, Five Nights at Freddy's was completely different than anything else on the market at the time. And it did very well for itself, especially because it kind of came out of nowhere. The only reason I believe Five Nights at Freddy's got any traction whatsoever was because of Markiplier. He was the only person who actually tried to make it seem like it was this fantastic horror game that didn't deserve all that attention. And the same thing happened with Mirror Layers, which was a indie game that was for free on Game Jolt a few years ago. It wasn't bad a game, but Markiplier was trying to hype it up like it was this big thing, even though the game was kind of boring. It wasn't revolutionary or anything. It wasn't anything special. And then after that, of course, he had Baldi's Basics, which was another new concept, but it shortly lived its existence. But Five Nights at Freddy's still persists as king, like I said, on YouTube. If you don't conform to these games that have started to suck over the years, you're not going to get any traction. My Resident Evil 7 series did very, very well. My Outlast series did very well. My Five Nights at Freddy's series had no help at all or any support because everybody was going and watching all those other people who were playing. So they had no reason to come and watch me play. There was no point. And so now, because everybody is leaving and watching those sort of videos, anytime I try and upload something that's actually good or decent or whatever, or some sort of game that's actually kind of scary and good, it gets overlooked because nobody's looking for that content anymore. They just want to come to YouTube to watch Five Nights at Freddy's, Baldi's Basics, that kind of crap. And now with Resident Evil 2 remake, people wanted to watch a lot of that. but I just don't find those games interesting. Like, I've always wanted to play The Evil Within on the channel. Fantastic psychological horror game, one of the best out there. The Evil Within 2, again, another fantastic psychological horror game. One of the best out there, and yet people never played it for YouTube that much or very long, and then there's also no support for it. Horror game genre over the years has become stagnant and gross, and also that's mainly because the developers who make these shit games, especially for Steam, they just take whatever's out their ass, they slap it on a piece of paper, they're like, yeah, that's good, and then they slap it onto their computer into Engine, using their little drag and drop systems that they can use. And then they say, yeah, that's a pretty good game. I'm going to release it for money. It's just become so ridiculous. It's become so old. Like, I'm so bored and it's stale. Like, the horror genre has become stale because everybody's just doing the same thing over and over and over and over. Instead of trying to evolve the sort of genre, they keep trying to stick with what worked before, and it's no longer working. Of course, to some people like the YouTuber Poise, who I fucking hate because he overreacts and fakes his reactions, by the way. I talked about him in another Table Talk episode. I'll link that in the description if you want to go and watch that. Markiplier fakes his reactions. Sometimes I believe Jacksepticeye does as well. Poise definitely does. The only horror channel I actually watch nowadays used to go by the name of Harshly Critical, and now he just goes by John Wolf. And he actually plays the games because it looks like he enjoys them. I rarely see him get scared though, however, because again, like the entire genre of horror has become stagnant and stale because nobody wants to try and think outside the box. They just use the same formula each time, and it's no longer working. Now I'm going to kind of briefly go over the sort of VR horror genre, because VR is on its own sort of spectrum whenever it comes to gaming, because you have to have this room set up that a lot of people don't have. You have to have the controllers, you have to have the funds to even buy a headset, and then you also have to have the computer able to run it in the first place, especially at a constant 90 FPS, which is almost required if you don't want motion sickness. VR horror, in my opinion, is the best right now because not only is it immersive to an extent, but also they can do a lot more with it because you're actually in the world. Whenever I played Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery game, that was a fantastic example of what a horror VR game could be like, because it put you not only on the ride, but it also let you walk around the mines, and then they would jump scare you and all that sort of stuff, the old sort of gimmicks, but it worked because it was in VR. The fact that it was all in virtual reality and right up in your face, it made it work. Of course, to a lot of people who have never tried a VR headset before, they don't understand what it's like to actually have one on your face and be immersed into the world you're trying to look at. On a computer screen, it looks completely different than how it looks whenever actually playing. Instead of it all just being 2D, instead everything is right there. You can touch it, you can walk up to it, you can grab it, you can move it, you can throw it. It's completely different than actually just looking around with a mouse and keyboard and then clicking on something to do stuff. Whenever the Paranormal Activity game came out for VR, I bought it almost instantly. And whenever I tried it, it was terrifying because you just had this flashlight and things were moving, things were flying off walls like paintings and stuff. It was dark. You had this phone that kept going off by some mysterious girl up in the window and that sort of thing. And then after that, you had Don't Knock Twice, which was a horror game to coincide with the movie Don't Knock Twice, which was about this evil demon where if you knocked on her door twice with her evil little door handle or whatever, she would come and drag you into her demon world and murder your ass. Those games are scary because paranormal typically doesn't happen in real life. Very few counts have been actually shown to be proven that paranormal things have happened in real life. So whenever you're actually scared of that sort of thing, and then you go into VR and experience it yourself firsthand, you're alone, you have your equipment on your like belt in game, and then all you have left is like a flashlight and their voice recorders, that sort of stuff, trying to find ghosts and shit. That's terrifying because it's not only realistic to look at whenever you're in the world, but also you're the one controlling it. Everything you do is by your body movement. It's no longer just, okay, I'm going to look around with my mouse and I'm going to walk forward by hitting W on the keyboard. No, and there's no inventory system. It's all like you. It's just you. And so when Exorcist Legion VR came out and all of its DLC, which I also own, anytime a sort of horror game comes out for VR, I try and pick it up as soon as I can to try it. And if I like it, I buy all of its DLC. I don't care. And then I also keep the game, of course. And there are all these sort of VR games that I love to play and I would love to record. But unfortunately, VR is also not a very popular thing on YouTube unless your channel is based around it. So that's what people come for. And so whenever I played the Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery for VR, that series did very, very well because it was my first VR series on the channel ever. And that's whenever I first got the VR headset. And so I wanted to try horror in VR. And it obviously worked because it got a lot of views, but also I was very immersed and very entertained, and I loved that game. Since then, I haven't posted another VR sort of horror video because after that, I played Batman VR. That didn't do very well on YouTube. I played the Accountant VR game. That did not do very well either. And so I just got from the general consensus of my analytics, I just see that people don't care too much for VR content. And I would love to play all these other horror games because they're great. But the fact is that, like I said before, people are going to other channels for other things. And so why would they come to mine for VR horror whenever they could go to someone else who has just a bigger following, but same equipment that I do? It just really doesn't make sense. Back onto the topic that VR is different than regular horror is because they're two different sort of experiences. One is more realistic than anything else that you can get to a video game, and the other is a computer screen. That's why I try to recommend people who have never tried VR to try it whenever they can. And then start out with a game like Beat Saber or something like that. And whenever they become comfortable, if they want to be terrified, not just scared or creeped out, if they want to be terrified, I want them to play a VR horror game. Normally, I try and start them out with the Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery because by far, out of all the horror VR games I've played, that is the weakest one. The Exorcist Legion VR game, that's the scariest. Because you're a demon hunter and like a spirit hunter, and you go to these crime scenes trying to figure out what killed these people, and it's dark, it's scary. You have to defend yourself with salt and holy water and crosses and stuff like that, and if you don't, you die. But of course, in Ghost Town Mine Ride and Shooting Gallery, you have a gun, you can shoot the things, and I learned over time that the machines that were coming after you, they couldn't kill you. They would die on their own afterwards. And so there's nothing really able to actually kill you in that game, but in Exorcist Legion, there definitely is. There's a lot of things that can kill you. The same thing with Paranormal Activity for VR, that there's a lot of things in that game that can kill you. But like I said, it's a huge difference going from being in the world and just sitting at a computer screen. And I think there should be more support for VR sort of horror experiences, especially if they could do where it's like a horror game for VR, but also they could have a desktop version so you could play either or. I know some horror games have done that, but for the most part, there hasn't been any decent ones that do both. It's either just VR or just desktop, and for the most part, just desktop, not really that effective. VR, super effective, but if you could do both and it's a good game, then a lot more people would play it. A very good example of that was Narcosis, which was a underwater horror game. So if you have the fear of being stranded underwater, that's the game for you because you can play it on desktop and you can play it in VR. My opinion, the game was awful, but also I played it on desktop mode, and it was a game meant for VR, but at the time I didn't have a VR headset, so I played the entire game in desktop mode, and I deleted half my footage because I was pissed and I didn't want it on my channel, so I uploaded 2 episodes and that was it. There were 5 episodes, I think. That goes to show some things work in VR where other things in desktop mode just don't. There you guys have it. Thank you everybody so much for watching my little rant on the horror sort of subgenre of gaming. And if you want to go and watch a horror movie sort of rant about the genre, go check the link in the description. It'll take you to a video taking you to Lauren Ashley's channel where she talks about the horror movie sort of genre and why she dislikes it as well. And I agree with a lot of the things she says. And I hope you all enjoy her channel and try to subscribe. She's an upcoming YouTuber. She's trying her best. And I'm really trying to support her as much as I can. But thank you everybody so much for watching. If you want to see more table talks, please let me know. I know I haven't done one in a year. But thank you again for watching. And as always, I will see you guys later.
Yeah.